There are a few things that are important to note about expenses and creating your expense report. First, if you're trying to get a car rental, it's difficult to justify a rental unless the taxis or shuttles are more money. And you would need to provide some sort of documentation showing this, but again, it's really difficult to do. Second, if you are driving out of state, you will need to provide an airfare comparison showing that it is less expensive to drive than it would be to fly. Third, it's really important that when you go to submit an expense report, you have an itinerary for your conference. So for example, for SIOP here, you have the full program. You will attach this PDF to your expense report, and it has information about the hotels and the food that's provided. Fourth, when booking in Concur, sometimes you will have to choose a more expensive flight for certain reasons. So for example, you might have a class when the cheaper flight is scheduled, and so you just need to provide justification in the comments as to why you chose the more expensive option, along with documentation showing this. So for example, you could attach a screenshot of your class schedule. Fifth, I touched on this also a little bit earlier. In regards to lodging and meals, the U.S. General Services Administration sets these per diem rates for both lodging and food based on location. However, there may be instances in which your lodging goes over these rates. So for example, when I looked up the hotel here, it's $247, and that is over these rates for Chicago here. And so when I go to submit the expense report, I would need to write in the comments the price of the hotel and attach a screenshot or a copy of the PDF showing the rates for the conference hotel. Sixth, tips cannot exceed 15%. And last, and probably most important, when you go to submit an expense report, your total expenses cannot exceed the amount that you were approved for funding. If you go over the amount that you were approved, then this extra will be taken out of your paycheck. So these are all things to keep in mind when you're booking lodging, flights, etc., and for when you're generating your actual expense report.